We're delighted to have Jeremy Bailenson with us here today. Jeremy. And today's session is a session sponsored by the Annenberg program on online communities. And as the host for this particular program, Andrea Hollingshead, who's one of the three directors of the research program, is going to introduce Jeremy. Andrea?
Here. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm delighted to welcome and to introduce Jeremy Bailenson as our second speaker this semester in the APOC Speaker Series. Jeremy is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Stanford, and he's the founding director of the Virtual Human Interaction Lab there. Jeremy is a cognitive psychologist by training and received his PhD from Northwestern University in 1999. After receiving his doctorate, he spent 4 years at the Research Center for Virtual Environments and Behavior at UCSB as a postdoc fellow, and later as an assistant research professor before moving to Stanford. Jeremy's main area of interest is in the phenomenon of digital human representation, especially in the context of virtual reality. His work seeks to understand the dynamics and implications of interactions among people immersed in virtual reality simulations. Not only does he study how people respond to and communicate in virtual reality environments, but he is also involved in the design of those systems. His work is fascinating, relevant, and important, and will only increase in its significance as these systems become more commonplace in our daily lives. Jeremy has been very productive so far in his career and has found a large and diverse audience for his work. His findings have been published in over 70 academic papers across many fields, including communication, computer science, education, law, political science, and psychology. Much of this work has been funded by the National Science Foundation and other corporate sponsors. On personal notes, I thought Jeremy would be an excellent choice for an APOC speaker. His work on the nature of avatars and on avatar-based interaction has important implications for online communities. And he'll be talking about that work today. So with no further ado, I turn it over to Jeremy. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that extremely flattering introduction, and being here at Annenberg is a great honor for me, and at APOC, which I'm learning a ton about. What a great group you guys have going here. So I think it's really exciting what you're doing, and I'm very honored to have this opportunity. So thank you for the invitation and for hosting it. This is looking forward to this. As I talk, what I'd like you guys to do is feel free to interrupt me at any point with a clarification of the question. I'm going to talk about a lot of work today. I'm going to go quickly through about 30 or 40 studies to really give you a sense of the work we do. And I think it's a good way to do it, but you're going to have, everything I'm going to talk about is published on this website. All the PDFs are up there. So it's up to you. You can trust on me that my measures are right, or my control conditions are there, or you can ask me. So anything for clarification, just interrupt me. It's totally informal. For more serious critiques about the horrible things I may be doing or about the fundamental flaws in my research, we'll save those to the end. But again, in case I use jargon or don't give the information you need, just interrupt me as we go along. So I want to talk today about transformed social interaction in virtual reality. And the real question I want to focus on is, in an online community world where one can choose to represent in a variety of fashions. You can change your gender, your race, your age, your attractiveness, your height, your species, little textual information. What are the consequences to the self? And what are the consequences to others where the constraints of the physical body and the constraints of truth and behavior are taken away? And that's the big overarching question we're going to work with today. As an overview, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about technology, and the sake of doing that is not to really care about the technology, but to really just answer some questions about how we run our studies. I like to talk. I did a postdoc at UC Santa Barbara for 4 years, and I learned just enough engineering to do the stuff that I do. So I like to say I'm a mediocre engineer and a good social scientist. So we're just going to talk about the technology as a way to get us through the studies. And then I'm going to talk about my theory of transformed social interaction. And then I'm going to rip you through a good 30 or 40 studies to really give you a sense of the space so we can see the possibilities here. And what I'd like to get from you guys is maybe discussion on the ethics and the implications. So in a perfect world, that's the structure of this talk. And yeah. So, what is a digital identity in the home and in an online community? So on the top left, if I say the word Second Life here, does everyone in this room know what Second Life is? That's is a social space where people interact via these things we call avatars. This top right is a Nintendo Wii. I know that people here are doing some experiments with the Wii. You have a character that moves with you as you interact, and this is, we consider this your avatar. Has anyone seen this commercial with Orville Redenbacher? Orville had enough video footage of him so that after he passed on, it was possible to posthumously construct an animatable 3D model of him. In this commercial, you guys should YouTube it. He's dancing around with his iPod, talking about how this baby holds 30 gigs, and really raises questions about digital form living forever and being transformable and mutable. I'm going to talk a lot about these creatures, these three-dimensional avatars, the same way that you would see them in Second Life, but ones that you can use equipment to interact with in a more persuasive manner. So this is what we think of as typical avatars. But then you can also extend everything I'm going to talk about today on a theoretical level, extend not only to a three-dimensional avatar, but to any online community digital representation. So on the top left, you see a JPEG, and what is that? It's a string of vectors that tells you red, green, blue values. It's a representation of you, but one that the computer can do many things to. Your voice on the cell phone, it's not your voice. It's not this thing that travels over a cup and string. It's a string of ones and zeros that's a loose approximation of your voice. And in the same way, I'm going to talk about these 3D avatars. A simple voice recording of you can be transformed and utilized in the same ways as these big avatars. We see lots of self-presentation on online communities. Jeff Hancock's got some great work out of Cornell where he brought in online daters. He captured their captured their profiles, brought them in, weighed them, looked at their W-2 forms, to look at their height, and actually can quantify the amount of deception that exists. So we know on these online communities, whether it's in just a 2D representation or a 3D avatar, this self-presentation occurs. So I want to talk a bit about how any virtual reality technology, ranging from a video game that you play to the very industrious technology that we build in the lab, how it works. And it works on a cycle of tracking and rendering. So what is tracking? If you're in a video game and you want to move forward and to walk in the world, what do? You hit this button. All right? The video game measures, you hit this button. And it says, hey, this guy wants to move forward a little bit. So tracking is simply measuring some physical behavior. All right? The next phase is rendering. So in a video game, when you're playing the game and you hit that button, the digital world needs to react to the tracking data. So when you hit the button to go forward, what happens on the rendering side? It redraws the world a step backward. So the idea feels like I step forward because it senses I've moved, redraws the world to reflect that movement. With a Nintendo Wii, it tracks your arm movement, and then it shows you your arm in the field of view. So it detects and tracks the movement and redraws the world to show that you've moved. The next phase is it displays it. So whether it's a computer game or a head-mounted display, you track the movement, you redraw the world to reflect that movement, you send it back to the eyes and the ears, and then the cycle begins again. 100 times a second, VR is track the movement, redraw the world to reflect the movement, show it to the user, and it goes over and over and over again. What does this look like? I'm going to show you a video. This woman here is in the bottom right. She's walking around in the physical world, and you're seeing what she sees out of her eyes. And the point of this video is to give you some idea of the level of realism that you see with these people, and also to see how she interacts with the world. So how does she turn her head to look around? She just turns her head to look around. And as she walks through the room, we're capturing her movements, and she just interacts naturally. This is a world we use at the Federal Judicial Center to talk about police lineups. And again, you should just get a sense of what it's like to walk around here. The idea is the world responds to your movement. It really feels like you're there. So there's this notion of presence in an online world that I'm not going to get too into today, which is really feeling like you're in the virtual space as opposed to the physical space. And every person who's got an immersive virtual reality lab, they've got what's called the pit. which is you put on the equipment, and then just like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, a big chasm opens up. It's a very tedious plank, and you ask the user to walk over the plank. 1 in 3 adults won't get within a meter of the plank. Only 1 in 3 will even come close to the edge. So it's a very persuasive experience. How many people in this room have worn a helmet and walked around inside VR? Okay, so we got a lot of that. Very good, very good. Okay, so virtual reality is a neat construct, but we're social scientists, and we really care about people in virtual reality. And how do we build your avatar? So when a typical subject comes for an experiment in my lab, she walks in, we take 2 pictures of her, and then 2 graduate students run in the other room, and while the subject is filling out forms in a very tedious manner, while the subject fills out forms, the 2 students do this to build that avatar. So from the photos, we use what's called photogrammetric software to really pull in feature points. So from 2 photographs, front and side, I can stretch together a 3-dimensional model, and after about 20 minutes, the subject's finished using the forms, all of a sudden what we have is this model that captures about 95, 97% of the variance of the face. So there's other ways you can build people's heads. Some people have 3D scanners. We found this to be actually more effective at it. And what you get is a fully realized 3D model that you can put on any body, that you can animate, that lives forever, that you can change at a whim. It's just a big pile of 1s and 0s that you've got complete access to. Yeah?
What's the name of the software?
It's called 3D Me Now. It's actually a 6-year-old company that went out of business that was repurchased by a company named WorldViz. You get it for about $1,000. And it's stunning that no one's made anything better in the last 6, 7 years. We could talk for a long time about why all this ridiculous equipment is not commonplace and it's super expensive. Okay, so we built your head, and it looks a lot like you. But for VR to feel like VR, it's not enough that it looks like you, it's also got to behave like you. So when subjects come in the lab, not only do we build their likeness, but we want other people to see them gesturing as they gesture. So for facial expressions, we use computer vision software from a web camera that you see on top of that computer. They can capture, these are not markers a person's wearing on the face. Computer vision algorithms are automatically 20 times per second finding these 22 dots. And so it can animate a model. What does that look like? So what you're going to see here is software we've been using as well as developing. This is the user turning his head. There's the webcam on top of the computer. On the right side is the real-time video. On the left side is the real-time rendering of the model based on the movement of those 22 dots. So he moves his face in real time. We get those 22 dots, and we morph this model in order to gesture like him. So we build this creature that looks like you, and it actually gestures like you. So it's a very powerful idea of what it means to have a physical avatar. Okay, so people are interesting, but even more interesting as social scientists, what happens when people get together in virtual spaces. And I promise that this is just about the end of the technology part. Here you have 3 separate people, a guy in UC Santa Barbara, a woman at Richmond, Virginia, a guy in my lab, and in every single location, their motions are tracked by the sensor. So everyone's getting tracked where they're looking, where they're leaning, where their hands are, if their mouth is open. The equipment on everyone's side tracks that data. The computers of the people who are in the simulation are automatically emailing each other that tracked data. So if I move forward, my computer sends that information to the other 2. Everyone has this world stored on their local computer, meaning all the raw materials, the 3D models to make this world, everyone's got that stored locally. And so over the network, people send the information about movement 100 times a second. Each person receives the movement data and then redraws the world based on that data. Okay, so Dimitri is in another city. He looks down. His computer sends that to my computer. I draw him locally looking down. I say, well, he looks down, I look up. So the computers automatically measure what we're doing, send that data to each other, and redraw each other doing it. This is a critical point. I want to contrast that with a video conference, that a videotape takes your image and sends all that raw visual data to the other person that receives it. We're not sending any raw visual data. We're sending high-level categories about what you're doing, and then the other person draws you on their machine doing it. Is that difference clear? Okay, that's going to become critical for the rest of the talk. Good. Let me show you what this looks like. So here is a kind of an old video, and I'm walking through there with a virtual camera. Each of these 3 people sees the other 2 from behind their own eyes. So as one person turns their head, you see that person turns their head. As one person opens his mouth, you see that. And it looks a little cartoonish, but it feels extremely realistic. I've got 2 colleagues. I meet them once a week for an hour in this simulation, and it feels after a minute and a half, you forget there's a physical table there. I mean, it really feels like these people are there. It's a powerful simulation. But I'm not here to talk about how virtual reality is better than video conference. I'm here to talk about a very specific idea, and we call that transformed social interaction. In the physical world, when I move, you see me move. When I have a gender, you see my gender. When I have a height, you see my height. When I look at you, you see me look at me. In the virtual world, because my computer sends you the data to your computer to draw me, it's up to me whether or not I send you my actual behavior, or alternatively, I send you some behavior that I want you to see that's in some way strategic and optimal. So you can see my actual behavior, my actual identity, or I can put a real-time filter that automatically grabs my tracking data on the way out and tailors it to you. And what we're going to talk about for the rest of the day is what happens in the social world, what happens to physical identity when all the physics that we've grown up with in terms of how one interacts in groups literally gets thrown out the window and fiction pervades. So why would you do this? Why would anyone study this as a social scientist? The first is it's a neat way to study conversational dynamics. There's this very popular notion in the nonverbal literature on synchrony, which is that humans have this very intricate structure to how that they interact, and what happens when you take this away, can things still function? On a philosophical level, I really love to grapple with these questions of if this thing looks like me but doesn't behave like me, or vice versa, can we really call it an avatar or an agent anymore? Who is it? Is it me? From a philosophical, it raises very important questions about what defines the self. And I think that's neat. But what I'm going to focus on today is lots of studies that demonstrate that as a speaker, as a teacher, as one who tries to have any form of social influence, in the virtual world I can do things that were never possible in the physical world. It really changes the way that we think about social influence. Any questions? Yes?
Do you think about autism at all? Or
we just got a big grant for doing autism. Let me talk about that later on because it's in specific reference to one of the studies I'll talk about. So let's talk about that again. I'll remember when I hit that. But we are direct benefits of Obama's stimulus package, an NIH grant that did not get funded and got back in and went refunded because they went back to refund things that had good ratings but didn't cross lines. So we're going to talk about dimensions that transform three different dimensions. In one way, I can transform me to make it look more or less, I can transform me and to how it looks to you. So that's transforming myself. In another type of studies, I can transform my abilities to sense. So some of you may remember from DARPA this idea of augmented cognition. I can give myself information about the world as I'm a pilot. I can give myself information about the social world just by grabbing your tracking data. So I can give myself new senses. And then the final is I can transform the context, meaning I can make the physical location look different for me than it is for you. And I'm going to give lots of examples of all of these if it sounds abstract. But let's start with transforming the self. This is using the tracking data to transform my image to you. The first line of studies that we ever did were about what we call augmented gates. So other than me taking my hand and poking you, if I look at you in the eye, that is the most powerful thing I can do non-verbally. If I look at you in the eye, your heart beats faster, you're more likely to return my gaze, you're more likely to remember what I say, you're more likely to buy something from me. Eye contact is extremely powerful. We've known this for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years actually. But the problem in the physical world is I can look you guys in the eye, but I can only look at each of you one at a time. So with collaborative virtual environments, remember, I'm sending all of you my tracking data. If we were all in this virtual simulation, we're all emailing each other tracking data. Not only can I send you optimal strategic tracking data, but I can simultaneously send different tracking data to each of you at the same time. So I can be a different Jeremy to every single person in this room, and you can receive different information at the same time about how I'm gesturing. So we wanted to test this notion and see how far we can take it. So we're not good artificial intelligence programmers, so we always start on the algorithm side, very simple and blunt. And so for this study, what we did is we had 3 subjects come in. This guy's job is to teach the other 2 about a certain topic, or persuade the other 2 about a certain topic. Unbeknownst to him, in one condition he has his actual head movements. In the other condition, each of these 2 people receives his direct eye gaze with a little bit of noise thrown in for 100% of the conversation. Okay, so what would that be like? Imagine it during this talk the entire time I was just standing here. So the prediction is, or the question was, well, how is it going to affect conversation? So the first time we ran this, 4 findings emerged very strongly. The first is, it was really unpleasant. So these 2 people self-report later on, they really did not enjoy that hour. It was no fun. They didn't like it. The second thing that emerged is that no one discovers this is not real gaze. So as uncomfortable as it was getting this direct eye gaze, no one thought the computer had taken over and was redirecting or was fake. Everyone thought this speaker actually was looking at them for that amount of time. The third thing that you get is return gaze. So even though these people are miserable when they're getting stared at, I mean, in normal face-to-face conversation, we rarely gaze at another person's eyes for even 7 seconds, and that's only for people we're very intimate with. So an hour of this is pretty intense. But they return the gaze. So we measure, the cool thing about VR studies is that every tracking data, every 100 times a second, I know everywhere they've looked and everywhere they've pointed and where they've leaned. In the condition where you get super gaze, you look back at the teacher. And as a teacher, we know half the battle is getting attention, so we get increased attention from the students when you employ the super gaze. The final study effect that we get is persuasion. Whatever the speaker is saying, they like him more, they are more likely to agree with what she's saying, they're more persuaded, they learn better. So it's no fun to be these people, but it causes me to pay more attention, and it causes me to actually learn more and agree more with what the speaker said. And we ran this the first time. We've now had to replicate this stuff 4 times. It's a very consistent finding, so it's really hard to make this data go away. And so, this is, if you've got an online community, this is, we add 4 lines of computer code that says, whoop, redirect the gaze. And then what do you get? You get increased attention, increased persuasion. So from a computer science standpoint, trivial. From a social science standpoint, really big results. Yeah?
Did you find any gender differences in terms of the person that's staring at the others?
Great question. And a lot of the studies, we always look at gender as a covariate because with nonverbal stuff. I would say when we find gender differences 4 to 5 times, it's women are better receivers of nonverbal gestures. So most of the nonverbal findings are amplified with our female population. They just notice it more. Men are adults. We don't even, we miss a lot of this. So mostly the manipulations work better with women than they do for men.
But for the one that's staring at others, do people interpret, say, if this avatar is a male, do they interpret it as more aggression?
Very great question. In all this stuff, because I try to stay away from the theoretical question of gender, so just to make my life easier, almost always go the same gender when I go with dyads. Because yeah, you raise all sorts of different questions. Yeah, it's good. It's a great point. All right, next line of studies is digital chameleon. So in 100 years of social psychology, one of the things we've learned more than anything else, people love themselves. Self-similarity is a driving factor of many aspects of social influence. A woman named Heine Chartrand at NYU in the late 90s came up with a clever study where she looked at nonverbal mimicry and sent people into interviews. And the interviewees would either mimic the gestures of the interviewer. So the interviewer leans forward, the interviewee then leans forward after she does it. The interviewer crosses her legs, then the interviewee does the exact same thing. So either the interviewer mimics the person or does not, does other types of gestures. And what she demonstrated strongly was that you go to an interview, if you non-verbally mimic someone, you are liked better, the odds of getting the job increase, the interaction is rated smoother. Since then, it's been replicated 30 or 40 times. A guy named Rick van Baren in the Netherlands had waiters repeat the orders, so they would say ham and eggs versus thank you very much, or other types of phrases. When you repeat orders, your tips go up by a substantial percentage because people like hearing their own phrases played back. So people love themselves. But think about how virtual reality works, and this is the same for Second Life as it is for World of Warcraft. This is not unique to the fancy equipment. The way it works is you send me your tracking data. I draw you locally on my machine doing what you said you did. And then I send you my stuff back. So we're constantly sending each other tracking data. It's trivial for me to, you send me your tracking data. Instead of drawing you doing it, I take that data, turn it around, put my name on it, and send it back to you. Right? You're sending me what you're doing. I can just take it, send it to you, and tell you that's what I'm doing. So a human mimicker can do her best to try to look at you and to tailor the movements, but the computer doesn't have to do any effort. And it can do it 100% perfectly or 18% perfectly, whatever you want it to do. So as a mimicking agent, the computer can make us perfect in that essence. So I want you to watch this video. And as I said, with algorithms, we always start slow and silly and blunt. So we did a bunch of what we call psychophysics experiments to try to just nail down the right parameters. And what you see here is a 4-second mirror. So this woman, unbeknownst to her, her head movements have been overridden by his on a 4-second window. So this is Nick Yee, who's the genius behind a lot of the theory and programming behind this work. He's one of the grad students at postdoc now. So watch as his head goes up, 1, 2, 3, 4. Her head goes up. So she does whatever he does at 4-second lag. She's just a slow mirror of him. Okay, really trivial to do this programming-wise. I said the other one was 4 lines of code. This is actually 2 lines of code. It's easy to do this. Okay. So she's blatantly mimicking him. What do we find in this study? In this study, so she's trying to convince him to sign this document which says, on Stanford, if you're caught without your ID card, you can get thrown off campus. It's a really unpopular policy that we pre-tested, but the critical question is, are you more persuasive when you mimic, which is what other people have found. So the first thing we find is that when I do the uncreative algorithm that just is a 4-second lag mirror, 95% of the people will have no idea their own gestures have been taken. So only 1 in 20 will do something to figure out that their heads have been, head movements have been stolen. That's usually people that spin in their chair. All right, so nobody detects this. And we're not used to seeing our own head movements in other places. So despite the fact that it was an exact analog, no one's detecting it. So everything I'm talking about today falls under the rubric of implicit findings, where effects, where no one's conscious of this stuff. It's all of this kind of under the carpet type processes. So no one detects it. The second thing is, as in the previous study, when I mimic you, you look at me more. So when I use a mimicry study compared to other types of gestures, you will not take your head out of my field of view. I garner your attention. The third is the odds of these subjects signing this really unpopular document increase when you're mimicked than when you're not. So again, it's going to be a similar story over and over. No one detects these transformations, but really, really effective on your non-verbal behavior, on your policy decisions, on your self-reported behaviors. We've also done this with virtual touch. So we've done things here. This is a handshake machine that basically one person can record a handshake, and the other person can feel it because the other device has motors. So it's a joystick with motors to play back what one person's doing. And if you turn on your side, you can kind of shake it. We've had 2 subjects come in. They would shake their hands virtually. One person would believe he was getting the other guy's handshake, but instead would be getting his own handshake back, thinking it was the other guy. So in real time, you're shaking your own hand. Right? We then have these guys negotiate, the standard negotiation task. And the critical question is, if my mimicry works, you're going to like me. And then what's going to happen? I'm going to trounce you in this negotiation because a nice congenial relationship is not conducive towards winning negotiation. And this is just what happens. So in this one, 0% of people ever detected it was their own handshake. But when I'm mimicked, I like that person more, and I also lose negotiation. And this is one actually that was very gendered. Handshaking is a very gendered activity, so this works more for males. It doesn't really work for females. Okay, not only can we do this with gestures, we can also do this with your face. So this is, I want you to be impressed by this movie. The reason I want you to be impressed is it's done with software that's 7 years old that costs $19 that a communication major who was 17 years old figured out how to use in 20 minutes. Okay, so this is not hard, not expensive. Okay. So once you see that again, and yet it's kind of cute that it goes from orange to gray, but it's a seamless morph from one head to another. And this is using a 2D image that you see in online communities. It's also possible to do with 3-dimensional ones that you can see in online games or VR. Morphing from one object to another is one of the easiest things to do in any kind of a graphic simulation. It's just a linear average function. It's not hard to do. So we wanted to ask a question: if I steal your face, how does that affect my ability to persuade you, to influence you, to teach you? And in this study, so in the Facespace World, we know that if I look like you, you find me more attractive, you're more likely to buy something from me. If I'm sitting on the ground, clutching my knee in agony, the odds of you stopping to help me increases based on if I look like you. A recent study that they did in England, if my face is structured more like yours, I am more willing to hand over my kids to you to let you babysit. So we like to think that we live in this world where we care about deep substance and personality, and we do, but it's really important to look like someone as well. So we decided to look at the 2004 presidential election, and we wanted to ask if a candidate takes part of your face, are you more likely to vote for that candidate? And this is one that mostly we use college students for our studies, but this is one I did with my colleague Shanto Iyengar. He's a political communication scholar, and we paid a lot of money to a focus group to get us 200 real people, all ages, demographics. We passively acquired their photographs 6 months before the 2004 election and had a army of students doing these morphings of the faces of those 200 people with the candidates for about 5 months. A week before the presidential elections, they saw Bush and Kerry side by side. And we had 3 groups of subjects. In one group, they saw the normal pictures of Bush, normal pictures of Kerry. In another group, they had the self was morphed with George Bush, and another random person of the same gender was morphed with John Kerry. And in the third condition, the self was morphed with Kerry, and someone else was morphed with Bush. All right, so that's a little abstract. Now let me show you what this looks like. So this is me on top left. That's George Bush in the middle. And this is a 60-40 blend where we've taken 40% of my face and put it in George Bush. All right, here's another woman in my lab. Here's John Kerry. And again, the 60-40 blend. You can even see, even though substantial changes, difference in skin color here, it's still, it still looks pretty much like Kerry. So before running any of these, before running any of the big focus group studies, we did a lot of testing in the lab, and it turns out 40% is a magic number. If you go up to 43%, it's blatantly obvious. If you stick around 40, we've now run in 5 separate studies over 1,500 people where I've one person at a time morph their face. In all these studies afterwards, when I've had the person write a detailed paragraph about the photograph of the candidate, not a single person has had any idea that their face has been put in the candidate at 40%. Really powerful, really easy to do. No one knows that it's happening. So we run this study with George Bush and John Kerry, where they see side to side, and what do we find? In the control condition, Bush is 46, Kerry's 44, the ostensible outcome of the actual election. In the condition where the self was morphed with Bush, Bush wins in a landslide by 13 points. In the condition where the self is morphed with Kerry, Kerry actually wins by 7 points. So despite the fact no one knows their own faces in there, and it's a week before an extremely self-relevant, important decision in their lives, we are changing who they claim they're going to vote for just based on an extremely superficial visual feature of the digital representation. So we got excited about this data. We sent it immediately to one of the prestigious journals in political science. Turns out the field of political science is founded upon the notion that the voter is rational. They did not like this study. And to their credit, it does sound a little bit far-fetched. So what did we do this? We then had to replicate this thing 4 times with the 2008 election, with an obscure Florida governor's race. We've replicated this 4 times now, and you can't make this effect go away. And when you know, the less you know about the candidates, the stronger it is. So with the Florida's governor's race, it was a swing of 20 points. This is just a really powerful way of achieving influence. Yeah, and really trivial to do on individual representation. Yes?
Jeremiah, in that earlier slide, one just before this, is it after that, is it the case that the undecideds just don't go anywhere? Or is it that the people who are for Bush move into the undecideds and so they sort of move, but you can't sort of see it? But it looks like those undecideds are just not going anywhere.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I don't, it could be the case that they're moving from both columns to the undecideds.
But then how come it's,
right, there could be a 3-way swap. I do know this, so when you actually, the data, we finally got this thing published, it's in public opinion quarterly now. The effect is really driven by the moderates, the independents, and the weak parties, people that aren't card-carrying Republicans or Democrats, are really the ones that are shifting. We do have data on that, but in terms of where they're going to this file, it's a good question. I can look into that. But yeah.
No, but everybody knows that undecided are the people who say they're declined to register are typically low information voters who really don't know anything.
Right. These are people that say that they're not voting for anybody. Right. So we don't even know if those guys are going to vote. Right. Yeah.
Question about whether anyone has looked at some of these facial features and adoption. In other words, whether people are really looking for people that look like themselves or for people that look like their family.
I can give you a name for that one. Email Lisa De Bruin.
Okay.
That's her. That's what she does.
Cool.
Yep.
So do you link between this and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming? We're mirroring.
Yeah. I know very little about that. I know that they do some stuff with mimicry, but I don't. I'm not well versed in that. Yeah.
Are there generic faces in the sense that somebody who has a more morphable face will be more?
You know, so we went back and we did all this math on George Bush has one of the most average faces. So we have a database of 1,000 voters that we use in this study. And I did really tedious work where you do the, it's called anthropometric. You find the feature points, you compute all the pairwise distances. George Bush has an amazing face. It's just amazing in the sense that it is more like the voters than most people would find. So I don't know what that means. It's just
Probably worth an extra 5 to 10 points.
yeah, you're absolutely right about that. We'd like to think the voters are rational, but all right. Let me forge on. So I'm going to shift now to I'm not transforming myself. I'm now giving myself new senses using the tracking data that I never had previously. So this is the idea of I've got all this tracking data. Let's not waste it because you're all sending me this data. And this is a really simple idea that if I've got a U-shaped room and it turns out that the people over here and the gentleman over here, I'm ignoring you guys. I'm not trying to, but the nature of how people move their heads in terms of our gaze, it's hard to do this. And we actually ran studies on this. So people in the corners of rooms get ignored about 1/3 of the time in a typical classroom. So we added a layer onto my tracking data that just said, whenever someone is out of my field of view, they immediately start to get transparent. So if I don't look at you, you disappear. Okay? And we just had teachers teach a class with this algorithm on it or not. And what you can see here is that when I've got that algorithm, I look at everybody. No one gets ignored even for 7 or 8% of the time. And in the next study, we've shown that when you have this, students actually enjoy the class more. They learn a little bit better than when they don't have it. So just taking this data that's free and using it as a way to make the world more constructive. Another way of changing sense is I can actually change the structure of how bodies work. Digital stuff doesn't hurt when you hit it. And as a way of learning physical motions, this is a project we're doing with a woman named Rushna Baichi. She runs an amazing virtual reality lab at Berkeley. She's designed a system that can really capture all of her movements. As a way of learning Tai Chi, we asked the question, well, what if you can, instead of looking at the teacher, actually step into the body of the teacher? And how do you know you're doing the move wrong? Because your arm is no longer inside the arm of the teacher. And I'm going to show you a really bad video of this. It's really poor quality. The woman in yellow, she's our Tai Chi teacher. The guy in the blue, that's his avatar represented externally, and he's basically seeing his avatar from the third person as he tries to step inside of her. And what we did here is subjects did this for a while. We then turned off all the technology, had them do the Tai Chi moves from memory, and we then videotaped it, mailed the videotapes to a Tai Chi judge. People that learn from the virtual reality where you share the body do better than when you can't share the body. They actually learn the moves better. When you compare it to the traditional videos, they do much better. It's a great way to think about learning physical motion. In terms of transforming context, you can bend space and time. I want to talk a second about, ignore this picture for 1 second, talk about time. We haven't done any work on this, but the same way that you've got DVR and TiVo, we're all rendering the world separately for ourselves. And not only can I change the visual acuity of it, but I can change the rate at which I play back time. So some of you in this room may have heard my talk 3 times before. You're kind of bored. You want to watch me on 3x speed, because you've heard it before. Other of you, I talk really fast, and all you want to do is slow me down to about half speed, and you can do that. So the real cool question surrounds when people simultaneously experience an interaction at different speeds, how does it change the world? But I'm not going to talk about that today because it gets really complicated. I want to talk about tweaking space. All of you have the world drawn differently for you. You can each draw you can each render the world the way the world works geographically differently. So people have this illusion, students do that, well, the people that sit in the back of the room, they do that because they think they learn better. There's actually never been a study in the field of education, to my stunning surprise, that by brute force stuck people in different seats and to see how well they learn. So we did that study to figure out, is there what we call a sweet spot? Is there a spot that if you sit there, you will learn better? All right, and yes, there is. It's right about It's right about here. So about 10 percentage points on an exam. You learn better if you sit there than if you sit way in the back or if you sit in corners. So the next question is, so we found the sweet spot. What if everyone in this room was hearing me right now from the sweet spot, feeling like they were the only ones in the sweet spot and everyone else was dispersed around? So everyone is drawing where the room is and where their peers are differently, and you use 7th grade trigonometry to make the whole thing work. It falls apart sometimes when you turn around and look to your buddy when both of you are turning around trying to talk to each other. It gets really complicated, but for the most part you can make it work. And what we demonstrated here is we've had people give lectures and have students learn, and you show about small gains, 5% gains per person when they're in this seat, but that's huge when you consider a class of 1,000 and a distance learning. Or, I was at Michigan when I was an undergrad, I took classes of 800 people. I mean, these small differences add up very largely when you've got groups. I want to shift to ethics, I'm going to talk about ethics not in a general way, but in a very specific way with a line of studies that we've been doing. And these studies, they ask the question, everything I've talked about thus far is, how can I transform the world to affect you guys? These questions are, well, when I transform the self, what happens to me? So the idea is these transformations are not free and they have an effect on people. What are the consequences psychologically to me when I transform myself in the virtual world? And the paradigm we use for this is called the Virginal Mirror. And this is Nick Yee. This is his dissertation work. He's walking around the physical room. Looks like a hotel room. He then walks up to the virtual mirror. And in our studies, subjects spend about 90 seconds gesturing back and forth in the mirror. So here he is. After 90 seconds, we ask him to turn his head, and the mirror image moves with you. It's really powerful. These things, you get a real psychological tie when this thing moves with you. So after 90 seconds, we forge the identity. You then go down. He went up as a white male. He comes up, and he's now a woman of color. Right? And the big question we're asking is, when your virtual feature differs on some parameter than your physical feature, how does that affect your conception of self? How does that affect how you react in a social situation? So the paradigm for these studies is, there's what the virtual room looks like, there's the equipment that's tracking you, here's the subject looks in the mirror, this is a bird's eye view, and this is a confederate. If I say the word confederate, does that make sense in this room? It's a person who's part of the experiment who just does what you want him to do, or her to do. And so, critical point here is that we wanted to measure the subject's behavior based on her belief of herself in the mirror. What we did, that's called self-perception. What we didn't want to measure, although it's cool, is something called behavioral confirmation, which is this guy treats you differently because of how you look, and you respond to that. What we wanted to measure was your own behavior purely based on the belief you have a feature. So let's pretend that, let's go with the male-female. Subject, he thinks this guy sees him as female, but actually the confederate sees it as a neutral, no gender at all. So the idea is what we're doing is we're isolating the belief, not the response.
So is the Confederate a person, or is Confederate?
Confederate's always a person,
Okay.
just because it's easier to do that than to program really good AI. Because a lot of the stuff involves language. We toyed around with both. But so this is another person wearing. Here, let me just show you what this looks like actually. So here's. This study looks at attractiveness. So here's a face we've pre-tested to be 1 standard deviation more attractive than the norm, and the person walks up to the mirror and sees himself as attractive. There's one that's pre-tested to be 1 standard deviation less attractive than the norm.
That one also looks older.
Yeah, we did take, I don't know if we did age as a, we tried to control for as many as we could. So then you turn around and there's actually another person wearing another helmet, and you are asked to interact with that person. So what did we look at? A lot. This last 3 or 4 years we've been really into this question. The first study that Nick ran was with attractiveness. Turns out the physical world, attractiveness is correlated with confidence, with self-esteem. Again, it's not a thing that as humanity we should be proud of, but how you look is really important towards how you act. And so Nick wanted to ask the question, when you think you're attractive, how does it change your interaction? So the Confederate never knows how attractive you are. You're always average, but you see yourself in mirrors as high or low attractiveness. Confederate asks you to step forward when you have the attractive face, even though you have no idea. No one is conscious that their face is more or less attractive. They're not horrible, unattractive, or it's not Brad Pitt there. when you have an attractive face, you'll step 1 meter closer to that person. You'll walk right up to them than when you're not attractive. You'll look them in the eye more, and then we record what you say during a 20-minute conversation and then play them back to people who are trained to code for confidence but have no idea what the experiment's about. When you've got an attractive face, you speak more confidently than when you have the unattractive face. The next study Nick wanted to run was with height. Height in the physical world is correlated with confidence. It's correlated with income. A very depressing study that just came out at MIT looked at online dating behavior. They got back-end data for every inch a guy is under 5'11". To get the same number of responses, he has to make $30,000 for every inch he has. We know height is important in the physical world and in the online world. So Nick ran a study where he made you 10 centimeters taller than the Confederate or 10 centimeters shorter than the Confederate. Really small difference. No one notices this consciously, and then did something called the ultimatum game, which is a classic negotiation money splitting task. When you're 10 centimeters taller, you win the negotiation more than half the time. When you're 10 centimeters shorter, you're 3 times as likely to lose a negotiation, regardless of your actual height. And with, just to make a point, these attractiveness and height studies, we've replicated them each 3 or 4 times. Really strong data. I'm already going, if you want to ask me the Q&A about age and race, I'll talk about it, but I'm running short on time, so I want to save questions for later on. I want to talk about extending this work face-to-face, though. With the attractiveness study, we ran another study where you're in the virtual world, you've got this conversation, you've got attractive or unattractive face. We then take you out of the head-mounted display, pay you for the study, walk you down 4 flights of stairs, say thank you very much, and as you're leaving the door, another person runs out of the side room and says, hey, wait, I need a subject for my dissertation. Can I give you $10 just to fill out this form for 5 minutes? So everybody thinks it's a different study. It's an hour later, and you're asked to fill out an online dating profile. And the big dependent variable we're looking at is who do you pick to be your potential dates based on, so you're picking people you think you have a shot with. An hour previously, when you've had an attractive face compared to an unattractive face, you pick better looking people. So there's confidence that forms inside the virtual world, stays with you for at least an hour. With the height study, we did the same exact study where there's a 10 centimeter difference. You had a conversation for 20 minutes in VR, and then you negotiated outside of VR, where we sat you guys down in chairs that were designed to make your height be exactly the same. And the numbers are identical. So you lose the negotiation by the same margin. This social hierarchy that forms inside the virtual space extends face-to-face even when you've got evidence physically that contradicts it. So, we have data from World of Warcraft if anybody wants to ask about that. I want to talk about a different type of study, and we call this VHIL. Feels like I've never been here before. I'm also calling this Doppelgangers. And this asks the question, if I build a virtual representation, it's got your face, it's got your body, it looks a lot like you, they're real enough that we use in police lineups. And then I show you yourself in the third person performing a physical action you've never done. So you see yourself doing something that we've animated. So with your model, we can animate it to do anything. All right? Once you've got the model, you can animate it to do anything. When you see yourself doing something you've never done before, how does that affect the way you think about yourself? So this is our Jessie Fox's study. She's interested in health communication. So here, this avatar is built to look just like this gentleman. Every 6 times his knee crosses his chest, his avatar thins down by some margin on the y-axis. So he gets to see the direct cause and effect of weight loss based on his physical actions. And we've run about 4 or 5 studies on this, and they range from, in one study we had people, after they saw this simulation compared to a variety of control conditions. In one control, it was the same gender but not their own face. In one control, they saw their avatar but it didn't lose weight when they moved. So a variety of controls. We then said, you know what, you've got 15 minutes before the subject comes. If you want to just work out on the treadmill, you can do that for 15 minutes, and measure how long they did that. 10 times the amount of workouts, voluntary workout that they're not getting paid for when they've seen this situation. The real driver is, so we make them exercise and show them lose weight, and then we make them stand still, and they actually gain a bunch of weight. So, we do both of those. Jessie's also done studies with eating, where she has people, their virtual avatars eating candy, and they actually watch themselves grow. And then later on, we put them in a room to fill out forms for 45 minutes, and there's a bowl of candy there. And we actually measure how much they eat. It has pretty large effects on how much you're willing to eat.
Do they eat more or less?
It's mediated by this feeling of presence and gender. So Jessie Fox, she's very much into gender. The female response is to suppress the urge. So females are socialized that eating.
So if they get bigger, then they don't eat as many candies when they're filling out the survey?
Yeah, men are the opposite.
They eat more.
Yeah. Eating is according to Jesse, who's a gender expert, eating is a masculine, men can eat. It's okay. Women are not supposed to. Catherine Segovia ran a very industrious study where she took a really clunky technology that I had in my lab and brought in 100 preschoolers and elementary school kids and asked the question, if one sees themselves in the third person performing some action as a kid, does that become a memory? So there's lots of work on false memory formation. The best way to cause a false memory to happen is have the child actively think about the process. So if you told someone, I want you to imagine what it would be like swimming with whales. Close your eyes, feel the water, smell the tank. What is it really going to feel like when you're doing this active elaboration process? Causes the child to form a false memory. That's probably the strongest way to get a false memory. With media, it's passive. The child doesn't have to do anything. All that she has to do is watch a medium and then can get the same information. So we had 4 conditions. The child actually saw the self swimming with whales. The child saw another child swimming with whales. The child imagined herself swimming with whales or did nothing. And what we showed is in the imagination condition and in the virtual reality seeing yourself condition, in those 2 conditions, over 50% of the kids, when we brought it back a week later, were bragging about how they went to see a world and swimming with the whales. 50% of our subjects formed a false memory. Remember, before it had to be an active process. The child had to want to participate to do this elaboration. Now it just showed them to this on TV. Yeah?
The child, when the condition where they see a child that doesn't look like them, to what extent does that child not look like them? Is it across gender? Is it across race?
We always stayed within gender. And if we had to go across race, we tried to match tint of skin color.
Okay, so you tried to keep it
We did our best.
phenotypically similar.
We sure did.
Okay.
Sure did. Okay, and then the final study is takes the science fiction. We've seen this in novels and movies for a long time. What happens is someone sees themselves in a billboard using a product they've never used and seeing positive consequence as a result. Grace Line has done 3 or 4 studies on this now. The effect is obvious. It's actually really strong. If you see yourself using a product, but a month later or a week later, I ask you how much you like the product. You don't remember that it was the one that you saw in the billboard. So we give you enough products so that you actually can't remember that I saw myself with this product, but you do remember and like the product better. So it's not a demand characteristic where people remember, oh yeah, I remember that was one of the picture. It's just some association is forged by the self-referencing that goes inside the advertisement. So that was a lot. Thank you for your patience. So conclusions, the digital world is a wonderful place for a social scientist as a citizen. I don't know. Transformed social interactions are very effective and hard to detect. And what's going to happen to the way we interact socially when more of online communities, when we're spending more time with these digital identities that can be captured, morphed, et cetera. So love to hear your comments, and this work is very labor intensive. I have so many collaborators on this. I know I made this sound like this is me, but I do very little of this work yet, just try to manage. So thank you.
Before we take questions, I understand that this talk is being videotaped. Actually, Jeremy informed me. Somebody can give that information? Do you know?
What's
the talk about where it's going to be on YouTube?
It's posted on YouTube on the Annenberg web page for YouTube's videos.
Okay, great. So thanks. So if you're interested in taking a look later on, it'll be there. Okay, so thanks so much, Jeremy. That was a wonderful talk, and we'll open it up to questions. Yes?
I had a question that actually relates to my last question. So in the reading that I've done, I've found very little research that's comparing the extent of the representation of the avatar, and a lot of the research you've done is kind of operated on the assumption that the closer they look, the better. And that's what I found across the research. So I was wondering, especially with the last study, I was impressed with the children, but I was wondering what research you've done or what your opinion is when it comes to varying levels of representation in the avatar.
Yeah, so I've got a side. Before I could do any of this fun stuff, I had to really establish myself in the virtual human community and the presence community. And so I've probably done about 15 to 20 studies on that, and in the world at large, there's probably close to 70 or 80.
Okay.
I can send you a meta-analysis that we did on that. I've got a nice bibliography. The best answer I can give to you is that photographic realism for the sake of it is bad if it outstrips the behavioral realism. So if you've got this thing, the anecdote I'd like to say there's this thing about Pixar and how they do their movies. They don't try to make their characters look too real because they know they can't do the gestures that well to keep up. And then you take something like Polar Express that people find a little creepy, the photographic realism was a little too high. Again, there's a lot of data on this. My best answer is try to find things that reach towards the question you're answering. Don't try to make it too realistic for no reason.
Other questions?
Yeah.
So most of the study that you've done were based on avatars. I think most of my research was on agents. So do you think some of the effect will be able to transfer to agent if they don't believe that's represented by a real person?
Yeah, I mean, we've done some studies with agents, and then think about this line of studies here. What do you call these things? They look like you, but they're powered by an artificial intelligence agent, right? They're operating independently of you. So their behavior is driven by an agent. It just happens to look like you. And one thing that I found, I want you to think about, if you think about these guys, right, the stranger in the Virginal Mirror, this thing moves with you, but looks nothing like you. The other one looks just like you, but doesn't move with you. So if you do a 2x2 with behavior realism and visual realism, you have agent and avatar in one corner, and then these two are those other weird cells. One, it looks like you, but doesn't move like you, and the other one, it moves like you, but doesn't look like you. I could draw that if that's not clear. Is that? So what I always say to that question is that this distinction that we've been clinging to about agents versus avatars is hopelessly broken. There's no such thing as a true agent or a true avatar. All avatars have lots of algorithms that fill in gaps in animations. Agents are always built by someone and modeled after someone. I think, and I'm not trying to criticize because I've obviously done tons of work relying on this distinction of avatars and agents. I don't think it's as clean as we'd like to think it is.
I guess I was asking that whether the person that believes that the person is represented by the person.
So there's about 18, we're doing a meta-analysis on that exact question right now. There's about 18 studies that looked at the belief of whether it's an agent or an avatar. And I can say with medium confidence of looking at the data that there's more influence when you believe it's a person. You still get it with agents, but it's ramped up a little bit. I just run a study with Dan Schwartz, who's a professor of education, where we had you learn while wired up physio from either someone you believed to be a VR agent or a VR avatar, and everything was held constant, and showed big jacks in physio, big jacks in learning, and a correlation between the physio and the learning. So the idea is what's driving the difference between agents and avatars is this spark plug that you get from this intensity of being around another person. But again, no one has answers with that stuff. That's my 2 cents. But this is a very muddy field.
I have a question on media literacy. I wonder whether some of these effects are very visible because people have never encountered these kind of manipulations before, but over time, as they become more standard in society, whether you expect some of these effect sizes to decrease, any kind of look, if you looked at that at all.
I've got 2 answers for you there. The first is I hope so, right? I mean, this is how do I sleep at night doing this work? Is I view my function as an inoculator, right? I think that, and I've got data to back that up with a mimicry. For the 5% of the people that detect it, it becomes mockery, and all persuasion attempts backfire. So when you know it's there, you respond in a negative way. On the other hand, I like to talk about this arms race that occurs with spam and spam detection. Like someone's going to detect there's manipulation, and then someone's going to come with a way to hide it better. I mean, what Jeff Hancock's studies show with online dating, we know there's deception there. Yeah, we still go. Right? So, I mean, how many dates do people go on where the person is completely opposite in what number of dimensions, yet the phenomenon still occurs? So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do agree that I know the effectiveness does go down when it's detected.
It's a similar question. I'm thinking about the kind of built-in genetic baseline stuff that we have here, the Uncanny Valley stuff, the idea that 40% is a threshold. Some of that it seems to be that that's genetic.
where that's hardwired from evolution in some way. Is that a hedge against this that prevents this abuse from happening? And a semi-related question, are we really going to be doing a whole lot of avatar space anyway, partially because of these reasons?
Let me go to the second one first. I do think we're going to be doing a lot of avatar stuff, and I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but given how online communities are just thriving, I think it's combining the we with tracking data with Second Life and World of Warcraft. That's going to happen. I mean, we know from your research with the amount of people using games. I mean, those are avatars, right? I'm not clear on the link of evolution to it, so maybe you can help me out a little bit there.
I was thinking of that. I think it's a NASA and Gone paper that when interacting with robots, that we very much want to know, is it human first, and then what's its gender, and then do we get along with it? That seems to be a reaction to a mating function that's hardwired into us that we want to recognize and identify and classify very quickly.
Right.
And then maybe that's the impulse that drives that 40% threshold, and the polar express effect is that you want to know, is that real? Can I interact with it? Or am I being duped? And then you get the negative reaction.
Yeah, I tend to be really critical of any mate choice selection explanations for behavior. It's just my own meanings. I argue with Cliff all the time about it, and Byron.
But it's what I thought of when you showed the Bush thing, and you said that he seems to be popular because he has a common face. If it's a phenotypical explanation, it would suggest that more people see themselves look like him because there are more people who look like him, and therefore that partly drives. That's not a mating thing, it's just a pure similarity thing, right?
Sure, but it could be that we're just socialized to like people that look like us because we learn in our lifetimes that they're going to be nicer to us. I like to go for simpler explanations, and again, this is my own pathology with resistance to the evolution stuff. But I'd love to talk to you more. Dimitri, I'd love to talk to you more about it. It's one of my shortcomings, which is I completely write off any explanation that I see.
The connection on this one, though, I think is tribal, particularly for political choice. We make choices within our circle because we think they'll share our identity, our values, our beliefs, our experience, which I think also answers the business about whether or not it's a rational choice. There's a sense in which it's very much a rational choice.
Oh.
Steve?
Plus, there's a simple cognitive explanation that people have given for why average faces are attractive, because it's a prototype, it's a prototypical human.
Sure.
Which is a little scary now that I think about it. I think of George Bush looking prototypical. But anyway.
To err is human.
But you wouldn't need sort of a strong evolutionary argument for that.
But yes, I agree. And Dimitri, the good science papers usually do these days. So I like the way you're thinking. It's just there's so many. It's hard to pin them down. It's hard to pin them down.
What do you do if you're running a campaign?
Well, the ethical, look, I'm not a policy person. From a feasibility standpoint, if you wanted to win Ohio, Florida, and one other state, I could spend 6 months with a room full of college kids, working 40 hours a week, and morph every single photo. I've done the math on this. It's possible. One hopes that ethically no one would do it. But again, I've been approached by political consultants, and I talk about this stuff, and I don't sell it. It's not that there's anything to sell. It's not
I'm going to ask a question real quick, too. We have a lot of graduate students in the room, and I'm wondering, where do you get the inspiration for your research ideas? I mean, you've just presented many different studies on a broad range of topics that relate to human communication.
Well, I don't know if you're going to like this answer, but the first National Science Foundation grant that I got funded for $1.8 million, in the first paragraph, I talked about this novel called Neuromancer. And I admitted that I took a lot of my ideas from the science fiction. So
science fiction, I mean,
it's a tangible answer. It's not. So I read a ton of sci-fi, and big thinkers don't always have to be scientists, but obviously you need to have the rigor and the due diligence.
And you gave Gibson a cut.
Well, I'd like to give me a cut of it. I don't know where he went. I think Stanford took about 9 of it, but it goes quickly.
Yeah, and I think the last question will be Martin.
Where do you now, after having studied all of that, and most of that goes in very particular things like World of Warcraft, or very playing with games stuff, where do you see personally, after all of this research, all these years, one of the biggest changes that will come up in the next also in the real world, for example, not only for games but for the life of the normal person?
Great ending question. Now, let me tell you about so I'm about to go over a slight change in my career where I'm going from assistant professor, hopefully, to associate professor, and the quest for tenure will be over one way or the other. I just wrote a big grant to the NSF to study climate change literacy, in particular, how to use VR to viscerally tell someone about their carbon footprint. So we all think that we're environmental and the other guy's not. And the fact that carbon dioxide is invisible and that these complicated mathematical formulas, it's really hard to see your impact. So for example, one of our studies is you're in the supermarket and you're choosing among rough sandpaper, toilet paper, and the beautiful Charmin that's just very luxurious. And there's really strong data on this that the nice toilet paper is brutal to the virgin forest. So yeah, I mean, every time you take if you use it for a 15-year period, you're literally cutting down an entire virgin 400-year-old tree if you're using digital paper. It's really bad. So, New York Times article. The New York Times is a huge piece on this, but that's not really changed people's behavior. Imagine that you're in the store and you choose the fancy stuff, and then immediately you're beamed into a virgin forest and from the third person. I mean, really making it visceral, so you can't say it's not me, it's the other guy. Or what if every car came equipped with a counter that basically floated in space all the carbon molecules as a function if you're driving? Anyway, we've got a lot of studies like that. But the idea is I want to take it to, obviously, using games and communities for something that's good, and that's where I want to take it personally. But I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.